guys. It's been a minute. So good to be back doing a regular video here for Killing for Company. If you are new to the channel, thanks so much for stopping by. For this episode here, I kind of wanted to do something different. So I guess if you were to zoom out a little bit, this started back when this thought for this video started when the album club got together and we were doing the Metallica album, like everyone else on planet Earth. Is that a little bit? Okay. Anyway, that was fine, but the entire time I was thinking, like, when I started doing YouTube videos, on this channel at least, I wanted to talk about the bands that I'm excited about, and I want to expose people to for the first time, get people interested in new stuff they potentially haven't heard of. And the first thing that came to my mind was the Chilean thrash scene. So if anyone is new to this channel, I have a very specific affection towards the Chilean metal scene in general, but in particular, I think their thrash scene is special. And so I wanted to highlight it here for this episode, and what started as, like, hey, I'll just talk about a few bands, recommend some albums. Don't listen to Metallica, listen to, the Chilean thrash bands, which this video is going to be at some level designed to address, but what it has really turned into is something a little bit more in-depth. So what I'm going to do for this is, before setting up the discourse for this video, if you're here just for recommendations for bands, I'm going to put them in the description, link to, whatever, Bandcamp or YouTube, etc. for you to check out. If you're not really interested in me waxing poetic about Chile and its history in thrash, then you can just go to the links below. But I kind of wanted to do something different, kind of stuff that I get excited about for this channel, and I think I've discovered what I'm really interested in, sort of period study with music. So it's going to be really addressing a brief sort of history of thrash for Chile as a country, and then after that, what I want to talk about is sort of the historical framework that potentially, sort of the thesis statement for this video, gives us what is the current day thrash scene within the country and how we got here. So I do want to take a moment to at least acknowledge some of the key bands that got the Chilean scene going from the country itself, not just relying on sort of the external, other country or other scene influences. So I already mentioned Apostasy, which is playing in the background here, but Pentagram, that later changed their name to Pentagram Chile, just to acknowledge, like, yeah, out of respect for the iconic Doom band, but so Apostasy, Necrosis, Pentagram Chile, Massacre is another one, Torturer, there we go. Like, there's a handful of bands that sort of emerged during that late 80s, early 90s from the country that are pivotal and start sort of this legacy. It should, to some degree, like, offer inroads into the modern bands that I'm going to be discussing. So the ones that I really are going to be talking about here is going to be a more modern history. So for people who don't know, I'm going to be playing clips from these during the course of the entire video, and I will list them below in the description. But just as a brief sort of overview, this is Decapitated, Park Crest, Mental Devastation, War Chest, Drencom. It also veers into like Death Thrash, Ripper, most people probably know, Demoniac, sort of a blackened thrash. Some that I have that I didn't pull, Hellish is another band on Unspeakable Acts. A lot of people picked up last year's Suppression release, which contained former members of Ripper. So once I get I'll play some clips during the course of this video for you. Now, Critical defines Misconception, their release from 2019. If you do nothing else in this video other than pick this record up, I will be pleased or satisfied with my efforts. This, like I said, came out in 2019 on Unspeakable Acts. Recently got picked up by Dying Victims for a vinyl pressing. So, in my opinion, it's the most important thrash release in recent years. I whether love it or hate it, like probably the last important or culturally impactful release came from Power Trip, right? Which was like 2016. So while I think this is much more of a pure thrash release and harkens back to the kind of Teutonic Bay Area thrash that'll be the focus of this video, I think that's where I'm going to point you, is like that's the key release for this time period for the modern bands. And if you do nothing else in this video other than pick it up, check it out. So moving from sort of the background where we have these iconic older bands into the newer releases, what I really want to talk about now is sort of the historical framework. So looking a little bit into Chile's history and the political, economic, and geographical sort of forces that help to shape the modern day thrash scene. While European influence and colonization really starts in the 16th century with the arrival of the Spanish, the German influence in the country traces back to the early part of the 19th century. Once Chile gained its independence from Spain, it still retained a level of like economic relationships with the continent of Europe. Hamburg within Germany was a major port city, still is. It's like one of the largest economic sort of forces and port cities within the continent, and had a relationship with Valparaiso in Chile. economic tie to Germany is important because it starts to also bring in greater German immigration to the country, most notably in 1848 when the German Revolution begins. So you have German revolutionaries bringing their ideas about German culture and political ideals to Chile. That starts in the middle of the 19th century. Here we get in the latter part of the 19th century a very different kind of political ideology coming from Germany, right? Beginning here into the 20th century, as more right-wing fascist beliefs came in the same, like immigration. Here we have Marxist ideology coming in the middle of the 19th century. Here comes fascist ideology at the end of the 19th, into the 20th. The Nazi Party essentially establishing themselves in the country of Chile as well. So while you have on the backdrop of the country a history of Spanish colonization as an introduction to the native population within the country, on top of that, you also have this conflict happening with Germany that is brought over in terms of Marxist ideology and fascist ideology being brought into the country and establishes a conflict into the 20th century. Entering the middle of the 20th century, there was growing presence for sort of left-leaning political ideology, Marxist ideology within South and Central America. And the United States was afraid of this, right? I guess that's the best or shortest way to say this. So Operation Condor, Henry Kissinger, which is, I guess, this is a CIA operation that was targeting countries within Central and South America. I'm just going to breeze over this. Charged with destabilizing, I guess that's the one way to, essentially state-sponsored terrorism for countries who had started to embrace Marxist ideology. And when Salvador Allende was elected president in Chile, this was the Nixon administration moving into the Ford, Carter, and Reagan administration, this was in effect. So all those presidents had their hands dirty in this sort of operation under the CIA. It was politically, financially, militarily led groups who were charged with overthrowing governments. And in Chile, when Salvador Allende was elected president, part of his political party was trying to nationalize a lot of their resources, and the United States saw him as a threat, and a military coup in 1973, September 11th, took Salvador Allende out of power and installed Augusto Pinochet. I just want to breeze through this because there's a lot to get in here, and I don't really want to make this the thrust of the video, but it's important to talk about this in the context of American influence in the country and where we're heading with this video. So that military dictatorship stood in power until 1990. And why that is relevant is even after the dictatorship came out of office, the economic forces that drove the country in that time period were still in place. And the constitution that was established during the Pinochet regime concentrated a lot of the economic growth and wealth in a very specific small amount of the population. Those economists came from a school out of Chicago. They were known as the Chicago Boys. Milton Friedman is probably the most recognizable figure from the movement or the economic school. But he put in place people of power who drafted and drove the economic development of the country, not just in 1973, but in decades. Even after Pinochet is removed from power or steps out of power, the lasting impact that the School of Economics made on the country still holds sway even in 2023. So Milton Friedman is responsible for individuals like Sergio de Castro, Juan Villasu, Francisco Rosende, and Rolf Luders. All of them played an impact in terms of the economic history of the country. Now, the reason I bring all of them up is they are part of a history that leads us to 2019, right? So like I said, to kind of circle back, when I picked up Misconception by Critical Defiance, there was a protest happening in 2019 in Chile. And sort of the slogan that protesters were using were No es 30 pesos, son 30 años, or it's not 30 pesos or dollars, it's 30 years. And what they meant by that was there was an increase in terms of public transit, like the cost of public transit, by 30 pesos. And it ticked off, essentially it was a tipping point where the population had been building towards this level of dissatisfaction, frustration, and anger with the economic disparity in the country between the poor and the rich. It had been gathering for decades, even after Pinochet had left office. So this rise in transit fare essentially is the, what do you want to call it? Match that starts the flame, right? And it was a massive protest. But what it drove home was, even though Pinochet is no longer in office, the effects of that dictatorship still play a role in our country today. And what happened was the president at the time actually instituted martial law, and the government's own military was turned on the civilian population in an attempt to quell the protests. And of course, this drove, it brought back images of that dictatorship. Here I am living in Kansas at the time, watching the news, and it just brought back, learning about this time period in Chile's history, America's relationship to it, and how it still was a factor, all these years later. So zooming out, right? I kind of, that's where I was thinking about when I don't, this Misconception record, which has meant so much to me, I also wanted to draft it within the context of a broader historical sort of relationship between where Chile was historically in terms of colonialism and European influence, looking for independence, radical political ideologies in contrast to one another that arrived in the country in the 19th century, only to be subject to, global, what do you want to call it? A coup d'etat instituted by a foreign entity. All of that culminates here in 2019 with martial law being instituted by its own government for a populace that has been dealing with a level of political corruption and oppression for centuries. So today, the bands that I mentioned that I'm going to be showing clips here, all of them are coming from Chile. They're operating in a region, like there's a density to this talent, right, that I don't think you can find in other places in the world today. There's no other country or city or region like Santiago or Valparaiso that are putting together this level, this consistency of thrash metal. The bands that I'm highlighting today are primarily playing in a Teutonic Bay Area scene. I think those are the major influences. But they span a wide array. Some are a bit more technical, some are a bit more brutal. There's plenty of death thrash, there's blackened thrash coming from the country. That being said, there is no other place, no other country in the world today like Chile when it comes to the level, the consistency of talent, and bringing thrash to a modern context. So, I don't know, what do you think? This is my first shot doing a little bit of like a history piece on a genre, a country, and and this kind of focus. I wanted it to be brief and concise. I hopefully got this taken care of. But so you can always catch me on the Heavy Metallurgy channel. I'm on the Wednesday Album Club most weeks, and then every month or so I'm putting together like some album reviews for the channel, sometimes the collaborations. I did one with Marty and Zoller on the Megaton Sword releases here. It's like a 3-hour dive on a record. Anyway, I had a lot of fun putting this one together, and look for more stuff. I think I have to do my Blood from Stone episode this year, which is like on 90s traditional American heavy metal. Look for an episode of that coming your way. Who knows? Thanks so much for sticking with me. If you check this out, tell me what you think. A little bit of something different than what you usually catch, hopefully. But until then, I'll see you guys later.